Yeah, so I'm Glynn Edwards. Just a little bit about myself. I'm actually independent. I work for myself. So that I'm associated with Black & Veatch. They're actually one of the people I subcontract to. I've been involved in sort of all aspects of biomass for years, but perhaps over the last 5 years in the UK, much of my previous experience has been overseas. But in the UK, last 5 years I've been doing quite a lot of feasibility studies, specifying systems, sizing systems, going right through to tendering with people. And then on the fuel side, I've run a wood fuel business, run a pelleting plant. But as time's gone on, I've been working for other people. I've either been working to help people on the fuel supply side develop their businesses, fuel quality, for instance, specifications, and on the other side of that, I do buying and negotiating for people. So I buy on people's behalf or act as an agent for them. So I'm quite heavily involved in sort of the biomass fuel side, and as time goes on, that's where I'm gravitating towards. Okay, so fuel. It's already been said that fuel has to be considered really right from the start of the project. It has a major impact on project design and economics. Okay. And what I often see is working, particularly things like in the public sector, there's a total disconnect between the fuel and the engineering and the civil engineering side. So people say, yeah, we want a biomass boiler, and it goes out the tender, goes down the subcontracting chain, and people start putting the boiler in without even thinking about the fuel. And you get all sorts of disconnects. You get disconnects in terms of economics. People end up being restricted to a very small variety or small spectrum of fuels, and that may not be the best in terms of price. They get restricted in terms of how that fuel is delivered, and again, the large part of the fuel price is in the logistics of the fuel in terms of transport and processing. And so it really needs to be a successful project. It's got to be tracked like a system, and fuel has got to be right there from the start, not left as an afterthought, as unfortunately it has been in a number of projects, particularly, as I said, that are going in and where the engineering has been treated almost separately from the long-term operation of that boiler. Okay. So why do you need to engage with fuel suppliers? And really, this is reiterating what's already been said to a degree. You need to know to inform the boiler specification and any consent requirements. Consent in terms of not only planning but emissions. So you need to know what types of biomass fuel are available, the grades of fuel, and for wood chip there's set standards, and boilers come with set standards of what they will burn. The two have to match. Okay, so you've got two variables there. You're looking for the optimum between the two in terms of economics and performance of the system. So you need to know the moisture content and the likely variance. It doesn't just come, you say I'm buying 30% moisture content. It is not 30%. It may be between 25 and 30%. You've got to make sure the variance of that fuel you're getting from your supplier actually fits with the variance that the boiler, not only the boiler can burn, but what it's commissioned on. You don't want people running back and having to reset the boiler every time there's a change. Okay, so you need to know what game you're playing. Source of material, that may be important for sustainability issues. Details of quality assurance procedures, level of potential contaminants, metals, stones, etc. With many of these things, you do get some stones. Okay, for instance, with wood fuels, you may get the odd stone. With straw, you almost certainly get stones. That may not matter. Okay, if they're small, and but also it depends on the boiler. How sensitive is the boiler to that? And if you're getting a dirtier fuel, you have to have a more robust boiler. So the specifications of both have to be, they're closely linked. So you need to inform fuel storage design and reception requirements. There are different ways of of doing this in terms of getting your fuel. Now, some of you, you know, if you're considering larger systems, you may even be going right back and saying, well, I actually want to have my own processing because I can get economics of scale and it pays me to do so. And there's a couple of glass houses up in Lincolnshire that do that. So they have their own wood fuel storage yard. But this is really coming from the point of view, if I'm buying it in, okay, what are the delivery vehicles being used? Volume of the fuel deliveries that possible, and the minimum volume of the fuel star required to discharge a full load. And what I see sometimes there, I mean, there's been some poor practice in the past from people who really don't understand how things like wood chip behave in terms of their flow or lack of it, and how it sort of sits in the hopper, and then. And if you've got an underground storage hopper, come along or above ground with a ramp or something, people think, oh, 50 cubic meter load, 50 cubic meter hopper. No, it doesn't work like that because it sits there, natural residence angle of chip, something about 45 degrees. And so very, very simple issues like that. Okay. Physical access required for the vehicles. I've seen projects, unfortunately, where there's been insufficient room for manoeuvre, or you've restricted yourself to a smaller, a small range of vehicles, and then shot yourself in the foot for later on when you want to change that for get a better price. And height clearances. The key point is you really need to avoid 20 years of awkward and very costly fuel delivery. Time is money. Now, this really reiterates what was said earlier. It's a system, and you need to think about it as a system early on. It will inform the design, and that's a two-way process. You also need to inform the economic appraisal. You need to know what the price of the materials, minimum delivery quantities to achieve competitive pricing, and the variance in fuel costs between an optimally sized fuel store and a fuel store requiring a great number of deliveries. Now, all of these play offs, to you, because you operate businesses, you know about logistics, you know about that, probably pretty common sense, but you still need to do it from the start and think it through and not leave it as an afterthought, because there may be a few stings in the tail. And I've seen people that even quite experienced, wow, oh dear, we can't get a walk-in floor trailer in here because we didn't think about the turning radius of these things. And to negotiate and finalise contracts and documentation. If you want complex contractual arrangements, such as forward pricing, start negotiations early. These things can take quite a long time. And you may need other documentation, but also to give adequate notice to the fuel supplier. These are bulk commodities, and sometimes they have significant lead times. For instance, if you're using a drier wood chip, that wood needs to be seasoned, and you can't just click your fingers and expect to have a guy with 1,000 tons of seasoned wood there. It may take him a summer to achieve a 30% moisture. Now, for the size of projects we're talking here, you probably wouldn't be burning 30% moisture content chip. But the same principle, the guys, the fuel supplier's got to go out there and source it, and he's not going to sit on large inventories if he hasn't got a market for it. So engage early. All fairly straightforward stuff, and it's a sort of gated process. I produced this. Really, this is much more applicable to situations where there's a chance where the engineering and the fuel supply get separated. But basically, you're doing a feasibility study, you're doing a market survey. What's out there? How much is it going to cost? Who's going to deliver it? What are my options? And that will then inform through the feasibility. At some point here, you'll come out with a preliminary boiler fuel solution, okay? With your specification, you'll then go back and you'll revisit that. But all the time, you're narrowing down your choices. You're giving something away, okay? So you may go back and say that's too expensive. You value engineer it to end up with a cheaper system, but you may have restricted what fuels you can put through that system in terms of moisture content, for instance, or particle size. And you really need to know what you're giving away so that you're making informed decisions. And what I see quite often is that the client, who's going to be operating this for 20 years, is having freedom, flexibility of that system given up by people who are not incentivized to look at it. They're actually incentivized to put in a cheaper system, okay, because they're on a fixed price contract to put it in, for instance, as in many public works. So know what you're giving up and think it through. That's the basic message. So let's talk a little bit. I mean, we can't really cover. It's a pretty broad subject, fuels, and we could sit here and go through each, all of the fuel characteristics of different type of fuels. But I think it's more important that we just go through at a broad brush. We haven't got time to do all of that. So I'm just going to talk about really a couple of fuels, and which are probably most relevant, which is straw and wood fuel. In terms of what's out there, now I always put myself into the position of the person who's actually investing and say, if that was my money, would I do it? What would I do? Okay, and if I was sitting in your position, I was considering this, think, well, hang on a minute, where's my fuel going to come from? We know that there's, fossil fuel oil price has gone up. We know that there's limited resource. So am I going to go and spend X 100,000, even £1 million to put in a system and then find myself in the same boat because of difficulties with supply and high prices in the future? There is lots of information around about availability of straw and wood fuel, but it needs to be interpreted with care. And to a great degree, it is, depending on the fuel, there's a local element because of the costs of transporting these things. And we'll come into that in a minute. Okay, so there's many sources that indicate total production potential, but they don't take into account the logistical and commercial reality. There's a dynamic and expanding biomass fuel market, but there's national and regional competition from other sectors. And again, that's sometimes underestimated. People think, oh, wood, so it all can go in biomass. There's established industries out there that use wood in various grades, and I'll talk about some of those. And unfortunately, there's no single reliable and up-to-date data source. So I'm going to talk a little bit about straw first, just to go through so you can see what sort of information is out there. This is the easy one. Wood fuel is much more difficult. Okay. So there's a very good report study out there, which I've quoted, which gives 2007 straw production estimates across the UK. So you end up with total cereal straw of about 9.3 million tonnes and oilseed rape straw of about 2.5 million tonnes. That's quite a lot of straw. But what it doesn't actually, that's the headline figure, picks up plenty of it, but it's regional because of the cost of transporting this across and because there's demand. Okay, so we've got demand in the west for bedding, and we've got predominantly production in the east of the country. And what this map does, it says county by county, it tries to estimate what the surplus or what the net balance is. And I've picked a few. It's got all the colour coding there, but I've picked a few out. So Lincolnshire, somewhere between 657,000 tonnes of surplus straw. And you can run through all of these. When you get down to along the south coast where we are here, there's less. Okay, 250 to 300,000 tonnes. But there's also a price differential, obviously, as you go across there, which reflects transport costs as well. So there's quite a lot of straw. What it doesn't actually show here is that you'd expect Cambridgeshire to have a lot more, but there's the Ely power station there, which burns about 400,000 tonnes. Okay. Now there are plans for 2 equivalent stations to go into Lincolnshire. Now whether they're going to go ahead or not, I don't know. But you have to be aware of that if you're going to put your significant size system in and then suddenly find that there's big local demand, then it is going to impact. Okay. And this is the big problem with wood chip, because you can do a similar sort of production maps how much woodland there is if we're talking about virgin forest fuels. But what it doesn't say is what all the local demands are, and they can be quite significant. For instance, up here there's Kronospan, which board manufacturer, massive board manufacturer, and they buy in low-grade timber, which is directly in competition with the biomass roundwood market. So they buy it in, lorry loads of stuff go up there. They buy it in quite cheaply, so 22 quid a tonne, which is fine, but you're in direct competition with there. But as you move away from there, obviously the haulage costs mean that you can compete quite well, because of the cost of hauling it up there, and the economics become unsustainable. The other thing is that there's a lot of biomass plant, which, well, there's relatively small amounts of biomass plant that have gone in so far, at smaller capacity, but there are quite a few plans for plant to go in because of the RHI. There's a lot of people sitting there waiting for that document to be published. So what you don't know is another source of competition which is really emerging is for logs as well, because people are putting in wood fuel stoves, and you say, well, logs, that won't be a very big market. But there's one supplier that I know quite well down here is now doing 14,000 tonnes of just firewood logs, and there are other people, so there's consolidation in that market. But it's also, there's still a lot of other smaller suppliers. So we've got a dynamic situation. You know what the total production might be, but that's steady state. But we really don't know what the demand is and will be. Okay, so probably the best figures to go on are these. If we start with forest wood fuel, this is a terawatt. This is steady state. Okay, in terms of what's the production potential estimates. That's terawatt hours of primary energy, and for forest wood fuel they're saying about 13, which equates to about 4 million tonnes at 30% wood chip, which isn't as much as so this is what will be available for biomass, but that's at steady state. On the plus side of this equation is that this is steady state, but what we have is about 50% of English woodlands have been undermanaged for at least the last 60 years. And what you have is a very large inventory of standing wood in those woodlands. Now there are incentives to manage those, and as the price increases, people are going to start managing those, and that wood's going to come out. So there's a lot of standing wood there which isn't included here. And I recently did a study in Herefordshire for a project, and there's actually vast amounts sitting there in the woods to come out. So I think that over the sort of lifetime of a boiler, if you're talking 20 years, and this is only my view, and it's difficult to get hard numbers to back this up, but my view is certainly there's a lot more wood there than this suggests. That demand at the moment, existing demand, is not that high, but the big unknown is what the demand is going to be with the HRI, and also what the co-generators are going to do. Now, you hear these things, see them in the paper, oh, Drax is going to burn 1 million tonnes of wood. Now, and people are putting in power stations, like in North Lincolnshire, which will burn wood. Now, what you have to remember is that most of that wood is going to be imported. So, and that's why some of these things have been built right on the port side. So people can stand there and say, hang on a minute, there's too much uncertainty, and I don't want to overemphasize that, but it's something which has to be addressed. But some people are standing there and starting to say, well, am I going to spend £1 million on the system and then find I'm going to be up against it in terms of price and availability of wood fuel? After oil and gas, wood is the largest traded commodity in the world, and every day there are huge bulkers travelling around the world for basically to feed the paper industry. There are vast amounts of wood in Canada, we know in Russia, Scandinavia, but elsewhere, Brazil, eucalyptus chip, for instance, and in Southeast Asia, rubber chip, which is basically just a waste. There are already plans to import these in large amounts into the UK. So On the one hand, we've got increasing demand, which is going to put price up, but on the other hand, there's a lot more wood there than this suggests, which is going to moderate that, and on the other hand, there's going to be a lot of imports to moderate that increase in price. So what I can't say is, I'm not a crystal ball gazer, is what's actually going to happen to that price. Okay, but in the same sense that I don't know what's going to happen with the oil price and fossil fuel prices. So it's a view that you have to take, but based on actually going and getting some advice and thinking it through, particularly what's going to happen locally when you've got local supply. You're not going to build a 6 megawatt plant if the guy next door is going to build it, and you're going to be directly in competition for those supplies. Perhaps, maybe you are, but there are other things you can do about this. So. Which I'll come on to. Now, in terms of straw, there's a lot of straw around. Okay. When it comes back to forest wood fuel, there's at least 3 million tonnes out there available. Okay, that isn't tied up. Straw, that equates to about 3.5 million tonnes. It's quite a cheap fuel, and there's going to be a lot less competition because it's more specialist equipment, and for the smaller boilers, they all burn wood. Okay, but the one that's ignored quite a lot is this waste wood one here. If you look at that amount, it's actually about equivalent to all the forest fuel and all the straw put together. And you say, oh well, I'll burn waste wood, and particularly when I show you some of the prices. But that is not a single grade. All waste wood is not the same. Within that, there is treated waste wood, which may have paint on with cadmium, lead, and other timber treatments with arsenic in, copper, and that has to go through a waste incineration directed plant, which burns it at 1100 degrees C, gets rid of any dioxins and the rest. That is very expensive plant, and really a minimum size plant to do that, which starts to get quite large. But that may still be within some of the larger boiler spectrum considering here. But there's also
minimum size. What sort of figure would you put on that?
I wouldn't. Certainly, if you're talking 4 or 5, then a wood plant, megawatts, wood plant starts to become attractive. You have to plug it in with your local supply of waste wood. I mean, that's basically, it's coming through the existing waste industry. A lot of it it just goes straight into landfill. Some of it goes into some of the larger wood burning plant. Okay, but yes, it does. Now, this is when things start to become complex, because the waste industry, they're pretty clued up. Okay, they've got it fairly well sewn up to a great degree. To actually break into the waste industry, I know because I've tried. Okay, is actually harder than you think, and the reason is the way that it's collected. Skips and the rest, you're effectively setting yourself up with a waste license to move it. Now, if you're doing large amounts, that may pay you, but then there's also you've got to think about the processing of it. So you need large specialist drum chippers to chip it up with big magnets to take out all the rubbish. Okay, it's more complex than you would think, and a lot of them have long-term contracts with public authorities, and to actually break into that industry is quite a significant. It's very entrepreneurial, and some of those boys are very sharp. Yeah. Well, the gate fee at the moment, it depends entirely on what that wood is. If it's wood, then you're talking about something like £15 to £30 a tonne, depending, is the gate fee. But that really depends, because where there's a market for it, people are undercutting each other continuously, so that gate fee is diminishing. So what I don't want to do is turn around and say, oh, you get a 30 quid gate fee on that, and you go along and you find you get absolutely nothing. Because these boys know that that there's an opportunity. But within that waste wood, there's other cleaner wood as well, things like waste pallets, which is a vast amount. I know, for instance, one company that has 3,000 tonnes of very clean wood. It comes in, it's the packaging for windscreens in a big warehouse. They got 3,000 tonnes. They spend about £100,000 a year getting rid of that wood, but it's clean. It is for in terms of regulatory purposes, it's the same as forest wood fuel. Okay, so you can burn it. But the problem is, for some people, smaller installations, is that you actually have to prove that it's clean, and there are no standards to do that. So at smaller installations, people are taking on a risk, because if they buy it in and then the local authority then turns around and says, you can't burn that, or you can burn it, but you've now got to go and spend an awful lot of money for emission monitoring and the rest, and license fees and all the hassle that goes with it. And people have shied away from it. So there's a big opportunity in that waste wood for larger, people like yourselves, to actually go out there and do it. It's not actually that hard, as long as you do it in a reasonably logical and informed way. So I'm going to come on to a few prices. Okay.
I was talking to somebody a couple of years ago. I was looking at some quite significant volumes of wood, chipped, processed, if you like, ready to burn, and that was basically the cost of transport. So the wood at source, ready chipped, was free, if you like, and then you pay transport on it.
Well, we'll come to that in a moment, because we've got some sort of prices, and they are only indicative. But if you want to find potential wood fuel suppliers, there's loads of information. You can look at those later on in terms of there's websites, National Marketplace, the Forestry Commission. Well, maybe not after yesterday's announcement, but there's a Carbon Trust database which is going to be published soon. Again, Forestry Commission, regional wood fuel offices, I think they're the first to go in the redundancies, so we can take that off. But the regional development agencies, they're mostly gone after April. But the Forestry Contractors Association, the Country Landowners Association are quite good as well. But and estates and the usual suspects. Sawmills might be quite good. You get slab wood, the round bits when you cut off, and that can be sometimes picked up for a reasonable price, although there's increasing competition for that. But forestry contractors, tree surgeons, cooperatives. For straw, well, pick up the phone up your local farmer. But the British Hay and Straw Merchants Association, they'll put you in touch with straw dealers. And they also have updated straw prices by region, which is quite useful and quite accurate.